Let's look at an illustration of God's sovereignty through time.
Illustration of God's sovereignty through time.
After 3 years as king,
After 3 years as king,
for 6 months,
Ahasuerus throws a party for 6 months displaying the riches of his royal glory.
Then comes
After the 6-month party, then comes a 7-day banquet where all the people in the capital city, from the greatest to the least, are invited to the palace for a feast.
There's hangings of fine linen all around couches of gold.
There's hangings of fine linen all around couches of gold and silver that are sitting on marble floors, and that was just outside.
Grand and
you go inside, it was even more grand and luxurious. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful.
Whichever they felt like.
People could drink or decline, whichever they felt like. Men were out in the courtyard having a party with the king, and the queen held a banquet inside the palace.
So on the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine,
So on the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded the eunuchs to bring Queen Esther, commanded the eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before him in order to show off her beauty to the men in attendance. It would have been considered proper. It would not have been considered proper for any woman, much less the queen, to appear before a mob of men that have been drinking for 7 days straight. So of course, she declined his invitation.
That made the king very angry, and after consulting with the mob,
what should be done, it was decided that she should be the queen no more. So Queen Vashti was never allowed to be in the presence of the king again.
When King Ahasuerus had
Sometime later,
Vashti,
when King Ahasuerus had cooled down Vashti,
what had been decided against
what she
her,
had done and what had been decided against her came to mind. The king's personal attendants suggested that a search be made for a beautiful young virgin,
that they be brought to the palace,
for beautiful young virgins, that they be brought to the palace to be presented before the king in order to choose a new queen.
During this time, there is a man who sits at the palace gate.
During this time, there is a man who sits at the palace gate. He's part of the king's staff. And his name is Mordecai. Mordecai's job has him around the palace gates all the time, every day.
Mordecai has a cousin named Esther.
And Mordecai has a cousin named Esther.
Because she has no parents.
And he's raising Esther because she has no parents.
So with all of that going on, they send out to have all these virgins brought in
and have them prepared to go in before the king.
Esther, as his cousin,
Esther,
gets caught up
somehow gets caught up in that and gets brought into that process of being sought after.
3 years.
It's important to note that 3 years into his reign, the king
Vashti's banished, and sometime later, we don't know how long, not too awfully long, the king begins to miss the company of the queen. And so they're on this search to get a new queen. They've brought in Mordecai's cousin Esther as one of many who've been rounded up from all over the kingdom. There's 127 provinces in the kingdom of Persia at this time, and they sent out to all the provinces to have the finest young virgins brought before the king for him to select a new queen. In that process, there's a preparation that these young ladies go through to go before the king. For 6 months, they are required to have beauty treatments and oil of myrrh, and for 6 months, they're following after that, there is perfume and cosmetics. So Esther had gained favor with everybody in charge of the harem, and so they assigned for her 7 servants, and she was given the best apartment in the virgin's housing unit. They've been working through these virgins. They're going before the king. After they go before the king, they move off to a different place, a harem of, I don't want to call them rejects, but they were ladies that the king decided not to make the queen as he kept the search going. So, long story short, Esther goes through this process, and the number of young ladies is getting low. She's down near the end, I guess, of those that they're bringing in before the king. And with such a lengthy time of preparation, they're thinking, hey, we need to go get some more virgins. So they send for a second round throughout the kingdom to bring in more virgins. Well, as that's happening, Mordecai, Esther's cousin, is about the gate there and doing his business. and he overhears a plot to assassinate the king. And so Mordecai, in his connections into the palace and everything, is able to get word to Esther of this plot. Well, just about that time, Esther gets the call, and so it's her time to go before the king. She goes before the king, spends the night, takes with her only the things that the head of the harem over in the palace preparation area suggested, and just like she won over everybody there, she won the king over as well. And the king decided, the search is over, we've found our new queen. As that's going on, Mordecai's hearing the plot to assassinate the king, and so he gets word to Esther, who now has the king's ear, and Esther, on behalf of Mordecai, relays the message about the plot to take the king's life. That gets recorded in the logs of history of things that happen in the palace, and no more mention is made of it. Now, this happened in the 10th month of the 7th year of King Ahasuerus' reign. And that's, again, just about the time Esther's going before the king, so she's got his ear. She passes that on to the king. And with all of that, life goes on. It gets recorded in the books. Nothing's ever done for Mordecai. 4 years and time goes by. And in that 4 years, there's an up-and-comer in the kingdom named Haman. Haman is a man who is what we will call upwardly mobile, and he works his way towards the top and finally gets to the point where he is the king's right-hand man. He's the top advisor in the country. And so a decree is made that all of the staff at the gate, when Mordecai comes in, are to rise, if they're sitting, and bow before Haman as he enters into the palace. Well, Mordecai, being a Jew and worshiping God rather than the king or those decrees, really feels that he should not be doing that, and so he doesn't rise and bow every time Mordecai comes and goes from the palace. Well, people notice, and they get word to Haman that, hey, we're all standing, and there's this guy Mordecai over here who's not, and you need to do something about it. So that just incenses Haman, because he's not being recognized as the top man that he is. And so Haman just is very angry. And in his anger, Haman decides that what he wants to do is he's going to kill Mordecai. But the more he thinks about it, he begins to understand that Mordecai is doing this because he is a Jew. And there's a whole bunch of Jews throughout the country. And so he goes before the king and he paints a picture of these foreigners that are in the land, keeping themselves separate. They have different ways. And Haman offers 375 tons of silver into the treasury to persuade the king to make a decree that on a certain day all of the Jews can be killed, Mordecai included. And so Haman is going after not just Mordecai, but all of the Jews. And so letters were sent to all of the land with the king's seal, making it a law that could not be revoked. Now this happened in the 12th year of the king's reign. So we're 4.5 years after Esther has become queen. And Mordecai is in with this group of Jews that now Haman has persuaded the king we're going to kill all the Jews in the 12th month of the year. And so Mordecai hears about this. Of course, word's sent out to all of the provinces and everything, and copies of the edict. And Mordecai hears about it, and he enlists Esther to help. But Esther says, the king hasn't called for me in 30 days. I don't know when he's going to call for me again. If this seems kind of urgent, but if I go before the king without being called, then they can just cut my head off for that. So Esther doesn't know what to do. Looking into chapter 4 of Esther, verses 13 and 14, Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, "Think not with thyself what thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The great C.H. Spurgeon, about those verses, wrote that it would be a painful thing that her countrymen should be destroyed, but still the stroke might not touch her in the seclusion of the palace. She would still remain the favored wife of the great king, and she might therefore selfishly look to herself and leave those who were in peril to look to themselves or to their God, while she coldly hoped that the Lord would somehow or other give them deliverance. Does that temptation come across the path of any one of us? It may. Is it so that because we are ourselves members of a flourishing church and because we enjoy all sorts of Christian privileges, we therefore hardened our hearts concerning dying churches and desponding saints? Do we imagine that the body can be sick, and yet we, as members of it, shall not suffer? If the church of God departs from the way, it will be to our injury. If the truth of God is not preached, we will be the losers. If Christian life is not vigorous, we then will be weakened. Yes, God can do without us. Enlargement and deliverance will arise to this people from another place if it comes not by us. If the Lord were tied up to any one person or any one nation, it would be treasonable for that person, church, or nation to be negligent. But as the Lord waits for no one, it becomes them to mind what they are doing. He can do without us. But how will we bear the disgrace, if it ever comes on us, of having allowed our golden opportunities to be wasted? What if Israel had been destroyed for lack of Esther's intercession? Her name would have been a byword among other nations as a base and traitorous woman. If the people had been spared by some other means, and she had refused her mission as long as there lived a Jew, they would have kept no feast of Purim, but would have cursed her memory. We should consider why the Lord has brought us where we are. Do we think he has done it for our own sakes? Does he intend all this merely that we may practice self-indulgence? Can this be the design of God? Do not think so. Has he done all this merely to give us pleasure? God's work is like a net of many meshes, and these are all connected. We are links of the same chain and cannot move without moving others. We're members of one body, and God acts toward us with that fact in view. He does not bless the hand for the hand's sake, but for the sake of the whole body. So anyway, after Mordecai challenges Esther, she replies, asking him to have all of the Jews in the city fast for 3 days and 3 nights, and she asks her servants to fast with her for those same 3 days and 3 nights. And after that, she tells Mordecai that she's going to go to the king and make her request. If he does not call her, then she will be killed. So they fast, they pray. Esther goes before the king. She puts on her finest royal gowns and goes to the court at the outer gate of where the king is sitting. And the king raises his scepter, inviting her in. And so the king asks her what would she would like, and he offers her up to half the kingdom. I will give to you your request. And she says, "O king, live forever. You are great. My only request is that you come to dinner tonight and that you bring Haman with you." And so the king grants her request and says, "We will come to dinner." And Haman is so thrilled after this dinner that he runs home. Well, during the dinner, the king asks again, "What would you have me to do?" And Esther repeats her request. She says, "O king, this is great. Thank you for coming to dinner. I would ask that you come again tomorrow night with Haman, again to dinner, and then I will make my request to you." And so the king is happy with that. They have dinner, they have dessert. Life is good. Haman is high as a kite because he's the only one that's been invited to dinner by the queen with the king. And so Haman runs home to share this wonderful news about, I'm the highest one in the country other than the king, and I'm the only one that got invited to this wonderful dinner with the queen. But on his way out of the palace, Mordecai's there, and Mordecai doesn't bow down. Kind of bursts Haman's bubble a little bit. And so Haman continues on home. He's so mad. He tells his wife and his friends, this has been great, but Mordecai's there and he didn't bow down. And he's so mad that he's beside himself. And so his wife and his friends that are around hear him out, and they suggest that, okay, Haman, we get it. You're done with this guy. Have a gallows built that's 75 feet high and hang Mordecai on it tomorrow. And so Haman says, great idea. And the next morning, word's given, they begin to build the gallows that Haman is going to use to hang Mordecai. But he's got to go ask the king if he can do it. And so the king that night, after the banquet with Esther and the request from Haman, can't sleep. I don't know if maybe he's curious, what's she going to ask me tomorrow? There's some mystery about it. There's something going on. King's not sure. He's not sleeping. So when kings couldn't sleep back then, what did they do? They had the royal record brought before them, and they had it read. So all that just droning on of the voices reading history to the king about things that happened would put them to sleep. Well, it didn't put him to sleep. So all night long, the king's hearing about this history. It's getting to be early in the morning, and the king hears the history again about Mordecai being the one that reported on the two men that had plotted to assassinate him. And of course, that resulted in an investigation, and the two men were found guilty, and they were hung. And the king asked, so did we ever do anything to recognize Mordecai for that? And there's nothing in the record that anything was ever done to acknowledge Mordecai or to award him for bringing that information before the king that saved his life. And so about that time, Haman is now coming into the palace to ask if he can hang Mordecai on the gallows that he's going to have built that day. And so as Haman comes in, the king has just heard this, and he asks Haman, what should be done to honor somebody that the king wants to honor, that's done something great for the king? And so Haman, thinking, oh, well, surely he's talking about me, Haman suggests that he have a royal robe that the king has worn put on this man, and that the crown be put on him, and the man be put on the king's horse, and that he be led around the town, especially in the town square, proclaiming this is what the king would do to those that he wants to recognize. And the king said, sounds like a great idea. I want you to do that for Mordecai. And of course, Haman now is stuck because he's suggested these things. And now this man that he had come to ask if he could hang, he has to go find the king's robe, put it on the man, recognize the man, and parade him around town, through the town square, recognizing him and praising him for honor for what he did for the king. So Mordecai spends the day doing that. And he is tired, he's hot, he's had it. Gets Mordecai delivered back to the palace, gets the horse given to the servants to put away. Haman goes home to get ready for the supper that he's been invited to again, this banquet feast with the queen. And so Mordecai is just beside himself, and he comes in the door and he's just had that kind of a day. Have you ever had that kind of a day? It's a tough day. And Mordecai is just at the end of it, and he's coming in, he's hot, he's tired, his wife greets him. I said Mordecai again, didn't I? Haman comes in, and he's tired, his wife greets him. And as Haman comes in and shares with her how his day has gone from the day before, when he was just high as he could be, excited, invited to dinner with the queen, he just had a miserable day. And his wife tells him, Haman, if this is what's going on, there's no way you're going to defeat this man. And just as she's saying those words, the servants come from the palace to collect Haman to go to the dinner with the queen. So Haman changes clothes, gets ready, goes to dinner with the queen and the king. So at dinner, the king again asks Esther, Esther, what is it that you would desire? Esther says, O king, live forever. You are great. There has been a proclamation made that on the certain day in the 12th month that all of the Jews are to be killed. Well, king, I'm a Jew too. Esther had kept that secret from the whole time Mordecai had asked her to, even before she went in with the virgins to the palace to be in the search for the queen. She had not revealed that she was a Jew, and now she reveals to the king that she too is a Jew and that all of the Jews are going to be killed, and she is very concerned and very worried about feeling for her people and what is going to be done to them. And the king is just incensed. He's angry. He gets up and he steps out. He's got to catch a little bit of breath. He's got to process this information that the queen has just shared with him. And so he steps out on the porch. Well, when the king steps out on the porch, Haman, recognizing that he's the one that instigated this whole thing and it's coming down around his ears, falls on Queen Esther's feet and begging for his life, just as the king comes back in and sees Haman now falling on his wife's couch. And Haman is not a good man in the king's eyes right now. The king is very upset that he's accosting the queen. And so as that happens, the king somehow knew that the gallows was being built. Long story short, Haman gets hung on his own gallows that day. Then the king says to Esther, I will grant, I can't change the law, the edict that went out that the Jews can be killed, but I will give you my signet ring. And so Esther and Mordecai get together, and as they consider and as they pray, they decide, they come up with an edict that the king passes a law that the Jews can all defend themselves. And so that goes out to all of the provinces and everybody, that the Jews can defend themselves. And let's look at Esther chapter 9, verse 1. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them, the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them for the fear of them that had fallen upon the people. So about that, Spurgeon wrote, although the name of God does not occur in the book of Esther, the Lord himself is there most conspicuously in every incident that it relates. I've seen portraits bearing the names of those pictured, but we have all seen others that required no name, because they were such striking likenesses that the moment we looked at them, we knew them. In the book of Esther, as much as in any other part of the Word of God, and I almost say more than anywhere else, the hand of providence is manifestly to be seen. We who are righteous by faith must trust in the Lord and in patience possess our souls. We must leave our adversaries in the hand of God, for he can make them fall into the snare that they have privately laid for us. If the decree had been that the Jews should be slain by soldiers of the Persian Empire, it would have been done, and it is not easy to see how the Jews could have escaped. But since the matter was left in private hands, the subsequent decree that they might defend themselves was a sufficient counteraction to the first edict. There is as much providence in the creeping of an aphid on a rose leaf as in the marching of an army to ravage a continent. Everything, the most minute as well as the most magnificent, is ordered by the Lord whose kingdom rules over all. Never was a man so utterly defeated as Haman. At one time, the people of God seemed to be all together in his power. Nero once said that he wished his enemies had but one neck, that he might destroy them all with one blow. Haman seemed to have realized just such power. Yet the chosen nation was delivered, The Jewish people lived on until the Messiah came, and they do exist and will exist until they enjoy the bright future that is decreed for them. So is it with the Church of God today. The foes of the truth of God can never put out the candle God has lit. In light of current circumstances surrounding us and everything that's going on right now, thinking about those things, isn't that good news? As we think about God being in it for the long haul, He's not just the God of the moment, He is the God of all time. Isn't it good news that He will see that His church survives, that He will be glorified? Corrie ten Boom said, "The wonderful thing about praying is that you leave a world of not being able to do something and enter God's realm where everything is possible. He specializes in the impossible. Nothing is too great for His almighty power. Nothing is too small for His love."